in the post-election audit, one of the most significant findings was that folding of the ballot can lead to problems. And in the past, I believe we've created a suggested area for the fold to happen. I think that this should, in light of that report that we just received the draft version of, where it talked about the problems with the creases, and in light of the fact that we've got such a huge increase in absentee voting, where the ballots are being creased and folded, you know, 2/3 of them may be creased and folded now and then. So it's kind of revealed an emerging problem. And part of the audit report was that we should spend more time on training about proofing, which has to do with working with your printer to try to figure out ways that, you know, the ink doesn't do certain things and so on. You might think this is just a routine item. This isn't really a routine item anymore, not in light of the changes that have happened in 2020. I mean, I think we should look more at it as we look at that whole issue of what happened in Oshkosh, creating the overvote and all of that, and I just think this item should be postponed.
Commissioner Glancy. The where ballots are folded is going to depend on the individual ballot. How many contests are on it, how many candidates are on it. You know, very often when you're creating a ballot, you have to fit it all on one, you know, you try and fit it on one side of an optical scan ballot, or you have to go to two. But to set a section apart on just on a template to say this is where you're going to fold it is going to limit how the ballot can be laid out. So I don't think we can on our template say this is where it needs to be folded. I think it's important to make sure that the clerks that are ordering ballots, when they're looking at their final ballot proofs, that fold marks are maybe indicated where they should be, but I don't think you can do it on a blank template, because if one place has a 4-person school board ballot where they have many candidates, 8 or 9 candidates listed, they're going to need more space in one area or another. You can't just say this is where it should be folded. And I agree that that's a problem. It's always been a problem with optical scan ballots because of the fold. But I think it's up to the individual ballot to determine where that fold should be. So I don't think we should hold up the format of the ballot and approving that today based on just the folding issue. Commissioner Bostelman.
I think it's also important to realize that when absentee ballots are ordered, there are specific absentee ballots that have a crease in them so that they are folded at a specific spot. And as I look at the audits that we did and the number of ballots that were in question, you're really looking at like 25 ballots out of all the ones that were recorded. My hunch would be is that they ran out of the ballots that have that crease in them by the printer, and that you probably were looking at ballots that were not designed and were just folded and put in where there would have been a problem. So I think it's important that we look to the clerks to make sure that when they have absentee ballots requested, that their crease is where they should be. But I don't think that the ballot proofing is going to make any difference. Some ballots are longer, some ballots are shorter throughout the state. I don't know how you could specifically state where a ballot crease would be ahead of time. That would just be my input.
Administrator Wolf, do you have thoughts on this matter?
My only concern would be timing, and so I guess I would defer to Cody and Richard on what we're hearing from our local election officials in terms of timing. An idea I had was perhaps if the commission were to direct us to provide these proofs, but then to also make sure that we're providing instruction to local election officials about how they need to make sure that they're considering folded ballots and how that could impact the ballot when it's tabulated by the voting equipment when they're doing their pre-lap tests or when they're doing their ballot proofing process with their county. And so perhaps that would allow us to meet our timeline, but also flag this important issue for them for the February election.
And I think that sounded like exactly what Marge was just talking about, which is making sure it's front of mind in terms of that result. All right, Commissioner Spindell, you have another comment?
Yeah, just one item. I think the issue that we're talking about now is extremely important because I too have heard the problem with that, and I think we need a little bit more input from the staff in a recommendation on this very important issue, especially as the number of absentee ballots have increased substantially. So I would recommend that we vote no on this today and come back when they have a little bit more opportunity to talk and give us some guidance on the fold.
If I may offer just, there is a recommended motion as part of the voting equipment audit that discusses the staff going back and preparing recommendations to address this issue in Oshkosh and presenting it to the commission at a future meeting. So that is what was one of our recommendations as part of that report.
Commissioner Bosselman, were you raising your hand? Did I miss you?
I was going to say that I think it's important for the clerks to be able to have this in enough time to be able to start dealing with what's happening. So I don't think postponing it is the best thing, and I am fine to amend the motion basically stating that this staff look at recommendations with regard to the creases on the ballots.
Okay. I believe that would be considered a friendly amendment. Who moved? I believe it was, had you made the initial motion, Marge?
Did.
Okay, and I think Commissioner Glancy seconded it. Commissioner Glancy, will you accept that friendly amendment?
Absolutely.
Okay. So we have a motion to adopt the forms and to instruct staff to provide guidance on the importance of folds in the printing and development of ballots. Is that an accurate summary? Okay. That is the motion before the commission. There's no further discussion. We'll call the vote. Commissioner Bostelman.
Aye.
Commissioner Clancy.
Aye.
Commissioner Knudson.
Aye.
Commissioner Spindell.
No.
Commissioner Thompson.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-1. So those ballot designs are approved with that clarification on the issue of folding. At this point, noticed in our agenda is the canvassing certification and issuance of certificate of elections for all elections in the state of Wisconsin other than the presidential election as contemplated by Wisconsin Statute 7.70 sub 5 sub A. There are no state races that are subject to recount at this time, with the exception of the presidential, which is now on appeal. So these certificates of election would be being issued to some state assemblies, state senate, district attorneys, and congressional electors. And it is noticed as a part of this meeting. And then what will happen is the commission staff will issue certificates of election under 7.705A to those candidates. And they will then be allowed to take their offices on the applicable dates of their election.
Madam
So,
Chair.
Commissioner Knudson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Unfortunately, this item was noticed in a way that isn't proper. Canvassing, certifying, and issuing certificates of election by the chairperson. Issuing certificates of election is not the role of the chairperson, and it would be illegal for the chairperson to actually do so. Unfortunately, it should have said canvassing and certifying by the chairperson and issuing certificates of election by the commission. We changed our delegation of authority letter back in, perhaps it was February, I don't recall. At the spring election, Administrator Wolf pointed out to me that whereas in the past the chair had done the certification and I had often delegated it and had Commissioner Jensen do it because she could go over and sign because she was in Madison. Administrator Wolf pointed out that it actually is the role of the commission, and that delegation of authority letter delegates that to the administrator. But this is not noticed properly for today.
Well, then if you consider this not noticed properly for today, that's interesting, but we are still going to canvass the results today. And the administrator, I'm fairly certain, will comply with the mandatory ministerial obligation to issue the certificates of election, mostly because I'm fairly certain the people who have been elected in Wisconsin would like to take office, and they cannot until this happens. So if the point of order is you don't think this is noticed correctly, since it has to happen on December 1st, I suppose the remedy would be we would end this meeting, we would do an emergency notice for 3 hours from now, and we would do exactly that. Is that what you're requesting?
I look at, Madam Chair.
Yep.
I don't think there's any improper notice about it. If someone that is going to get elected and receive their certificates from the administrator pursuant to the delegation of authority that governs this, let them object. But as far as I know, people want to get on with their lives. And as Mr. Knudson said, there was no evidence of fraud in this election in 2020 November. And these people, despite receiving the same types of votes that President-elect Biden received, are entitled to take office. So I don't think there's an issue about notice, and if somebody who's getting elected objects, they can file a lawsuit.
All right, it is the intention of the chair to canvass those elections. I think the people elected need to be able to take office. I think the people of the state of Wisconsin expect their elected officials to take office, and we are required to do so today. So that's statutory. So we will briefly run through the canvass of those offices. Administrator Wolf, you did provide to me, the chair, the canvass statements for the state of Wisconsin for all races with the exception of the presidential election. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And as to each of those canvass statements, were those prepared as the designee of the chair by the WEC staff?
Yes, that is correct.
Did any of those canvass statements as provided have a material mistake in the computation of any votes?
So during the initial canvass, because it happens when we start receiving them from the 72 counties after the general election, during the initial canvass, there were some errors that were identified. In those instances, we sent them back to the counties who reconvened to correct the errors. The statements that are before you reflect those corrections, and we're not aware of any mistakes in those statements.
Did any of the canvass statements demonstrate a failure to canvass votes or omit votes from any ward or election district?
I would offer the same response to that, is that, in the initial canvass, as the 72 counties submitted information after the November 3rd election, we did identify errors, in which case we brought them to the attention of the counties. The counties then reconvened as required by law and corrected their canvasses and resubmitted them to us, and the statements in front of you are reflective of those corrections.
Okay. And have you prepared certified statements and determinations as my designee, which declares the total number of votes cast in each of those races?
Yes, we have.
I have had the opportunity to review those statements, and I am authorizing the use of my electronic signature to be applied to those. And I will work in pursuant to the delegation of authority in consultation with the administrators so that the certificates of election for all of those races in the state of Wisconsin, with the exception of the presidential race pursuant to 770 sub 5 sub A, may be issued today, and those persons may take office as those terms begin. That is the conclusion of the
I
items.
just have a quick question.
Commissioner
Is
Spindler.
that, so in this particular item, the commissioners have absolutely nothing to do with it. It's all up to the chair. Is that correct?
Correct. And the other thing that should be made clear is the staff similarly has no discretion either. Their role in issuing certificates is ministerial, meaning that essentially they function as scriveners, as the drafters of the documents which are then issued. So similarly, the administrator under the delegation of authority does not have the authority to say no, does not have the authority to refuse, because this is a mandatory ministerial duty to issue these certificates. So once the canvass is completed and the determinations are made, then the certificates of election are issued, and out they go, and those persons can then take office, and I'm sure they're all very eager to go take office.
Madam Chair, I make a motion to go into closed session.
I'll accept that motion. Is there a second to go into closed session?
A second.
Yes, Commissioner Bostelman seconds. For purposes of discussion of that, it is 12:30. We are set to go into closed session at 1 p.m. So what we would do is we would move to go into closed session and reconvene at 1 o'clock in our closed session Zoom location. So that would be the plan for today.
That would allow us to have lunch for once.
That would allow us to have lunch, a cup of coffee, whatever makes people feel good about their day. I will call the vote on the motion to go into closed session. Commissioner Glancy.
Aye.
Bostelman, sorry, gotta go in order. Commissioner Bostelman.
Aye.
Commissioner Glancy.
Aye.
Commissioner Knudson.
Aye.
Commissioner Spindell.
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We are in closed session. We will reconvene in the closed session room at 1 p.m. Thank you, everyone. This concludes the open portion of the Wisconsin Elections Commission meeting for December 1st, 2020.